This is The World Today, bringing you a snapshot of the latest happenings from around the world. I am Peninah Karibe. Coming up, Ukraine says it will add 100,000 troops to its armed forces while calling on Russia to remove soldiers near the border. And an Olympic torch relay begins in Beijing 2 days before the official opening of the Winter Games. Ukraine's president says he will increase the size of the armed forces by 100,000 over 3 years. Volodymyr Zelensky on Tuesday also promised to increase soldiers' salaries, but said it's not because war with Russia is imminent. He called on Russia to withdraw troops near the Ukrainian border. Also on Tuesday, Russian President Vladimir Putin accused the US of trying to pull his country into an armed conflict and said he was hoping for a diplomatic solution. On Tuesday, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson visited Kiev to meet with the Ukrainian president. Right, let's now go live to CGTN's Guy Henderson, who is in Kiev, and Stuart Smith in Moscow. Guy, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson visited Kiev and met the Ukrainian president. Do we know what was discussed between the two leaders?
Well, there appears to be a pretty concerted effort underway by European NATO countries this week to try and step up particularly their levels of defence cooperation with Ukraine. We currently have a press conference about to start between the Ukrainian president and the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte. Now, the Netherlands is one of those European countries that has, up until very recently, ruled out the possibility and refused the idea of sending lethal defensive weaponry to Ukraine along with Germany. But there are now fierce discussions underway within the Dutch government about whether officials may be prepared to shift their stance. And we are very likely, I think, to hear more about that possible shift in the Dutch stance during that press conference. As you say, on Tuesday, we had the prime ministers of two other European NATO countries, the United Kingdom and Poland, visiting the Turkish capital for talks with Volodymyr Zelensky. They had, during that visit, also agreed to step up their level of defence cooperation and form what they called a tripartite defence pact. Now, what that immediately means for Ukraine is that it will receive about $120 million in aid from the United Kingdom. From the Polish government, it will receive various forms of military equipment, tens of thousands of rounds of ammunition, air defence systems, surveillance drones, that kind of thing. And during the press conference of the Polish Prime Minister, he was scathing particularly and singled out Germany for not following suit and beginning to take a tougher line when it comes to sending defensive weaponry and when it comes to signing off or not signing off on a major new gas pipeline and that would send natural gas directly from Russia to Germany. So potentially a concerted effort underway here by European NATO countries to essentially step up that defence cooperation, start to send things like lethal weaponry and really leaving Germany, which is more used to leading diplomatic efforts in this crisis, certainly since 2014, to leave Germany isolated and out in the cold.
And Stuart, coming to you, how has the Kremlin reacted to Ukraine's expansion of the armed forces and the visit of UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson to Kiev?
Yeah, to this particular announcement of an increase in troops, there has been no particular reaction, but we know what the Kremlin would think. It's been incredibly concerned since the 6 weeks of negotiations started and Ukraine began asking for military assistance, that in order to try this escalation in military activity in Ukraine could potentially lead to Ukraine trying to take its eastern region back by force. This pro-separatist region, which looks to Russia for financial support and political support and most likely military support behind the scenes. This region has been at war with the rest of Ukraine for years, and Russia is concerned that with a more beefed up military, with those weapons coming from the West, with Ukraine investing more than ever in its military, that could mean it will take offensive action to resolve that conflict rather than waiting for diplomacy and talks to sort things out there. Ukraine recently has been less hawkish than the United States and United Kingdom about the threat of invasion itself, which is why the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was keen to point out in his public speech at least that this increase in troops was not due to the Russian threat. But we heard from the UK Prime Minister again that UK and US interpretation of intelligence is that an invasion is potentially imminent, and Russia has said in response to that there is no threat of war in Ukraine, there's no threat of Russia attacking any other country, and the Kremlin accuses the UK and the United States of stoking fear and panic, not to try and support Ukraine, but to provide distraction to their own domestic politics and also for political gain. So the Kremlin very unconvinced that these calls for action and this threat of war are anything other than a distraction and attempt to escalate the situation.
All right, Stuart Smith in Moscow and Guy Henderson in Kiev. Thank you both for joining us. The opening ceremonies of the Beijing Winter Games is just 2 days away. On Tuesday, the Olympic truce murals were unveiled at the athletes' villages. International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach led athletes and officials in signing the mural at the Beijing Olympic Village. This is an Olympic tradition. In signing it, participants signify their commitment to building a peaceful world through sports. Prince Albert of Monaco has arrived in Beijing to attend the Games opening ceremony on Friday. The 64-year-old used to be a professional bobsleigh athlete, and he competed in 5 Winter Olympics. He is now a member of the International Olympic Committee and president of the Monaco Olympic Committee. The prince has attended the opening ceremonies of several major sporting events in China, including 2008 Beijing Summer Olympics. This is his 11th visit to the country. The torch that will light the Olympic flame on February 4th began its relay this morning from the Beijing Olympic Forest Park. Dai Kaiyi reports.
As you can see right behind me, the starting point of the torch relay at the Winter Olympics Park is only less than 50 meters away. So torchbearers kicked off their run at about half an hour ago, right over there. And despite the chilly weather here in the morning, we saw dragon dance performance before the torch relay, and you can feel the passion and warmth of the when the flame passed through. So authorities earlier said that the relay will always prioritize safety, which is why it's been arranged at a closed venue, and they took into account factors such as epidemic prevention control, which is why everybody in the park is required to wear masks. So the relay features some high-tech elements, as you've probably just heard, that there's going to be underwater relay conducted by robots. Lots of things we're going to be watching closely and bring you all the exciting moments. So the torch will also be delivered at some of the most iconic sites in Beijing and its neighboring Hebei province, such as the battling section of Great Wall, the Summer Palace, as well as the Great Canal Forest Park.
The Beijing Winter Olympics torch relay began this morning from Olympic Forest Park. Yo Yang spoke to the last 2 torchbearers.
I'm at Shenyang Square in Beijing Olympic Forest Park, and this is the final spot of this morning's torch relay. And about 135 people have taken part in the first leg of this important Olympic event, and each of them proudly bearing the torch for about 100 meters. And earlier we spoke to the last 2 torchbearers of this relay, and they're among the country's highly regarded personalities. They are Li Xingang, who is the chief designer of the National Stadium, also known as the Bird's Nest, and awarded winning director Zhang Yimou, who will also direct the opening ceremonies on February 4th.
I feel very lucky and very proud to have been part of 2 Olympic torch relays. These games represent our country's strength and development. I took part in the 2008 Olympics torch relay in Athens. The torch was called Auspicious Clouds, and this year's Winter Olympics torch is called Flying. Both of them convey the Chinese people's openness, inclusiveness, passion, and energy.
I feel very honored. The torch is beautiful. I still have the torch from the 2008 Beijing Olympics. Not everyone can be a torchbearer twice. I think the torch relay represents the Olympic motto, higher, faster, stronger, together. Olympic Games help people unite and understand each other, and that's what matters the most. I think that's why the word together has been included in the motto. When the first Olympic Games were held, people called a truce in the hope for peace. That's why we released doves in the opening ceremony. It represents humanity's wish for peace.
The Olympic flame arrived in China on October 20th last year, and Beijing holds the distinction of being the first city in the Olympics' modern history to host both the Summer and Winter Games. In line with the COVID-19 pandemic and control and prevention measures, the length and the duration of the torch relay has been shortened. Here are some fast facts about these three-day torch relays. There are about 1,200 torchbearers. Their ages range from 14 to 86. Among the Chinese nationals, 57% of them are frontline workers of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the foreigners from more than 20 countries and regions will also take part. And so will robots. The relay continues Thursday at the Badaling section of the Great Wall, where the torch relay for the 2008 Summer Olympics took place, and it will then visit the International Grape Exhibition Garden in Yanqing before traveling to the third Winter Games co-host city, which is Zhangjiakou. There, the torch will pass through 5 local landmarks, including Desheng Village and the Fulong Ski Resort in Chongli District. To increase engagement in this Olympic milestone, an online format of the relay, making use of the virtual reality and augmented reality technologies, has been taking place on multiple social media platforms. There will also be an exhibition tour of the torch across the country. Yu Yang, CGTN, Beijing.
And that's it for this edition of The World Today. CGTN's Daniel Arap Moi and Gurum Challa are standing by for an update on the Africa Union high-level interministerial meeting that's in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, coming up next on Africa Live. Stay with us.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
The tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
Who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from
Within
the front
clear
line.
view of this front line position.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Guinea-Bissau President Embalo survives coup attempt, says many officers killed. France and the EU to decide on future of anti-jihadist force in Mali. And regional body IGAD says it is ready to support Sudan settle ongoing crisis. This is Africa Live. Hello and thank you for joining us. I am Peninah Karibe. Also coming up. In business, Ethiopian Airlines resumes flying the Boeing 737 MAX plane. In sports, Burkina Faso optimistic to shock Senegal in their semi-final at the ongoing Africa Cup of Nations in Cameroon. We begin in Guinea-Bissau, where President Umaru Sissoco Embalo has broken his silence after surviving an attempted coup. Embalo says many members of the security forces had been killed, repelling an attack that may have been linked to drug trafficking. This, as the UN Secretary General said, he was deeply concerned by the growing number of coups in the West African region. CGTN's Joy Kirukijuma reports.
These were the scenes emerging from the capital of Guinea-Bissau in the latter part of Tuesday, a government compound where President Umaru Sissoco Embalo was chairing a cabinet meeting under attack. The unclear situation saw the African Union and ECOWAS condemn what they called an attempted coup. Appearing in the evening, Embalo said the attackers had tried entering the compound just after the cabinet meeting but were repelled.
This was an attempt not only of a coup, but to kill the President of the Republic and all my cabinet, but they were not able to get in.
The first moving events in the former Portuguese colony on the West African coast came just over a week after the military in Burkina Faso, another country in the region, deposed the president. According to Embalo, the attack in Bissau was well organized and related to people in the drug trade.
We were attacked with very heavy weaponry for 5 hours. But now everything is under control. And one thing I can assure you, there is no side that is linked to this coup attempt. It is an isolated force, but it is also linked to the people who fought. When I was elected President of the Republic, I promised to fight two things: corruption and drug trafficking.
Poverty-stricken Guinea-Bissau is viewed by the UN as a major transit point for Latin American cocaine headed for Europe.
It is for us clear that coups are totally unacceptable. We are seeing a terrible multiplication of coups, and our strong appeal is for soldiers to go back to the barracks and for the constitutional order to be fully in place in the democratic context of today's Guinea-Bissau.
We want to make sure that there's a united stand, not just by the Security Council, but by the international community as a whole, against all military seizures of power, be it in Burkina Faso or anywhere else.
Embalo, who has enjoyed strong support from the military during a previous political crisis, has defended the army against any involvement in Tuesday's coup attempt. Joy Kirukijuma, CGTN.
We're now joined on the line by Alan Yero Embalo, a local reporter based in Guinea-Bissau. Alan, the president says yesterday's coup attempt has failed. The government is in control. What is the situation on the ground?
Yeah, the situation is under control. I'm now in the street. People are just crawling, and the circulation also is going on. So I'm very close to a market where people come just to buy some goods. Mainly, the situation is calm, unless the governmental palace, where still the soldiers are just are standing by and waiting maybe for the order coming from the high ranking of the soldiers, at least to go back to their barracks. But mainly Bissau is calm, and we spent also a very calm night. Yesterday, there was a meeting between the head of states and some high-ranking. It was about the actual situation. Some guys have been arrested. There was some people that died, but we didn't have any details about the number of the victims. So we hope also by the starting or the earlier evening, we'll have a communique coming from the army about the situation. But I tried this morning to have a connection with some politicians also, because the head of state didn't nominate them, but I think that some politicians are behind these soldiers. But we tried to get some leaders of political parties. All of them just have closed their telephone.
All right, thank you very much for that. Alan Yero Embalu joining us from Guinea-Bissau. Now, Denmark says its troops deployed on peacekeeping operations in Mali are in the country with a clear mandate. The Danish foreign minister says there is currently a diplomatic discussion with the transitional government there on the situation. This follows the military junta, which has been ruling the country since August 2020, calling for the Danish troops to leave. France and other European allies have urged the junta to allow the forces to remain. Our correspondent Tessa Makende brings us more on the situation in Mali.
About 100 Danish troops arrived in Mali last month, according to them, on the invitation of the country's leadership. They are part of an international contingent fighting an insurgency that are spread in the West African country and other parts of the Sahel region. But the Malian government, led by Assimi Goïta, in a statement said it was yet to give approval for their deployment and asked them to leave. The junta seized the reins of power in a coup from ex-president Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, who was elected in 2018.
President Keïta earlier in 2019 had signed an agreement to allow troops to come and intercede in the situation. But with the coming of Goïta, he saw it as a threat to allow the Danes to come into Mali, even as they are coming in to serve as mediators to the crisis which has already struck Mali.
The rejection of the troops marks a further deterioration in Mali's relationship with the European Union and other regional blocs. The French government has been supporting troops from Mali to fight insurgents in the Sahel region. In June last year, the Economic Community of West African States suspended Mali from their regional bloc after 2 coups in 9 months and called for a return to democracy. The regional body has imposed new sanctions against the junta after it said elections that had been promised for this month will be pushed back until 2024. Member countries of ECOWAS have temporarily closed their borders with Mali and halted financial transactions with the country, leading to hardship for many citizens. Tessa Makende, CGTN, Jos, Nigeria.
France says it will decide with its EU partners on the future of the French-led special forces in Mali in mid-February. This comes after Mali's ruling junta expelled French Ambassador Joël Meyer for hostile comments by France Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian. Le Drian has vowed the move by Mali will not deter their determination in the war against terrorism. The minister also expressed concern over the deployment of Russian mercenaries from the Wagner Group, which Malian authorities have denied.
Our will is still intact. This event, due to the irresponsibility and the illegitimacy of a coup d'etat government, will not make us stop our fight against terrorism. Mali is a Malian issue. Mali is so isolated today that its only partners are Wagner's mercenaries. The fight against terrorism will continue, and will continue in the Sahel. It will also continue with the agreement of other countries in the region.
This week, the African Union will hold its annual Heads of State Summit ahead of its 20-year anniversary in July. The meeting offers an opportunity for AU member states to assess the organization's achievements to date as the continent's foremost peace and security body. Meanwhile, 2-day high-level interministerial meetings have kicked off today in Addis Ababa. CGTN's Daniel Arap Moi and Gurum Chala will be bringing us the latest coming out of the summit, and they are both joining us live from the AU headquarters in Addis Ababa. Daniel, political upheaval in West Africa must be on the agenda of the AU. What has been the reaction to the situation in Burkina Faso, Guinea-Bissau and Mali?
Yes, Peninah, foreign ministers from the different African countries have just held a meeting this morning, and top on the agenda, what was discussed is the question of the insecurity within the Sahel region. And of course, Guinea-Bissau being one of the latest where we saw an attempted coup. You know, the chairperson addressed that issue this morning as well. He did condemn, together with other ministers as well, did condemn what's happening in the Sahel region, the coups that we are seeing happening. But also of importance, Peninah, is that one of the foreign ministers that we had an interview with this morning, something, you know, very interesting. He said until Africa stops interference by, you know, Western actors or actors from the West, the situation in the Sahel and generally the insecurity within.
All right, let's apologize for that technical hitch we're witnessing with Daniel. Hopefully we'll be able to sort that out and continue with him. But let's bring in Girum now. Girum, interministerial high-level meeting kicks off today. What is on the agenda of the two-day meeting and what resolutions do we expect from that meeting?
Peninah, first of all, the Executive Council is the most important council of the African Union Summit that is happening every year, as it formulates some of the most important decisions to be finally decided by the heads of state when they meet in a few days' time here in the Ethiopian capital of Addis Ababa. So today, the first and the most important report that the Executive Council heard is about the COVID-19 pandemic and its economic impacts on the economy of Africa. In relation to that, the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has also delivered a report on how it has been assisting member states and also fighting the pandemic and trying to find vaccination and other things for the continent so that it can pass this pandemic situation with a story of success. On the other hand, insecurity is also something that has been on the agenda of the member states. In general terms, as you know, from the coup d'etat in Western Africa region, which is something that my colleague was earlier talking about, to the conflict situation here in Ethiopia, Sudan and Somalia, all of them have been discussed about. So the Executive Council is expected to provide recommendations for the member states to deliberate on over the weekend, Peninah.
So, Girum, what are some of the achievements made by the African Union and how can the body reinvigorate its work to safeguard peace and security on the continent?
So, Peninah, the African Union, since its inception, as you know, next year is going to be 20 years. In the last 2 decades, it's been struggling to bring together member states, despite the fact that the peace and security situation of the continent has been a challenge, and also addressing the climate issues and economic development issues were also there. Although arguably some people say that the African Union was not that much successful, many others also will tell you that when it comes to the climate resilience issues, bringing the climate security, including that one, it has been successful in bringing member states together. It has also been standing together when it comes to issues of the United Nations, for instance, when it comes to finding a seat in the peace and security in the peace council, the Security Council of the United Nations. So, in general terms, one can say that although it has been struggling, the African Union has tried to bring member states together in different agenda formats. But then again, this is a work in progress. For instance, Agenda 2063, the 50 years plan of the continent, is almost 20 years old now from the inception to its endorsement to its implementation. But Africa is still lagging behind when it comes to implementation. In the next few perhaps days, we will be hearing how Africa is planning to go forward under the umbrella of the African Union itself. So we have to wait and hear what these member states and heads of state and governments are going to decide in making Africa a better united continent in the future.
All right, Girum, we appreciate that. Thank you very much. Girum Chala live for us in Addis Ababa. Now, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development says it is ready to support Sudan in settling the country's ongoing political crisis following a military coup in October. An IGAD delegation, which held several meetings with various Sudanese leaders, says it is determined to support parties in completing the democratic transition process. According to the Executive Secretary of IGAD, they have a role that can strengthen the African Union and other diplomatic missions combined.
As a regional organization, we have to have a role. That role can be combined with African Union and other international effects. Also, we did discussion with all the diplomatic community here. So, most importantly, we should not create here and there different initiatives. The people of Sudan needs a solution.
Still in Sudan, protesters marched in the streets of Khartoum in commemoration of a teacher who died in 2019 after being detained by authorities. Ahmed Al-Qaid was among protesters that marched against former ruler Omar al-Bashir. CGTN's Wanja Mungai has more.
It's been 3 years since the death of teacher Ahmed Al-Hayr. Today, activists, colleagues and family are taking to the streets in commemoration of him. They're also sending a message to Sudanese authorities. They're chanting in Arabic, "The people are stronger, going back is impossible." Still in pain for his loss is his brother Abdelhamid Al-Hayr.
Ahmed Al-Khair was a very gentle soul. He was arrested by the Security and Intelligence Service on Thursday the 31st in 2019, where he was tortured and brought back to us dead.
Late Ahmed Al-Hayr had joined the demonstrators in Khartoum. At the time, they were protesting against the then leader Omar al-Bashir, who was ousted later that year. A post-mortem conducted on the deceased body indicated Ahmed had succumbed to injuries from beatings. Security officials, however, had claimed Ahmed died of food poisoning. Public outcry followed by a court case in pursuit of justice saw 29 members of the National Intelligence Service sentenced to death by hanging. It is the delay in the formation of the Constitutional Court to follow up on judgment that's getting them agitated.
All the courts have supported the rulings, but all that is left is the ruling of the Constitutional Court, and it has not yet been formed. There has been a delay in its formation on the part of the state. If the Constitutional Court is formed, our case will not be difficult because it is one of the first cases. But there is a delay by the state in forming the Constitutional Court.
Today we are calling for all Sudanese teachers and the masses of the Sudanese people, professionals and resistance committees to commemorate his memory and to remind the judiciary, the public prosecution and the judiciary in particular that the issue of the martyr Ahmed Al-Hayr is a national issue and his killing is that of the whole nation. It is necessary for all Sudanese to demand justice and the establishment of the Constitutional Court.
The memorial of the slain teacher coincides with yet another season of political upheaval in Sudan. The Sudanese people have been protesting since October last year. A coup brought to an abrupt end a power-sharing regime between the military and civilian leaders led by former Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok. Seemingly, the story of Ahmed has been repeated. According to the Central Committee of Sudanese Doctors, 79 civilians have so far died and more than 2,000 injured by officials during crackdowns on protesters. Wanja Mungai, CGTN.
34 minutes into the hour. You're watching Africa Live. Let's take a short break. Coming up. Prolonged drought pushing families in Ethiopia to the brink. And Somali women and CSOs call for inclusion in parliamentary elections. Families living in Ethiopia's lowland regions are struggling to survive a severe drought, which is drying up water wells, killing livestock and crops, and pushing hundreds of thousands of children and their families to the brink. The country now requires urgent humanitarian assistance to cushion the affected population. CGTN's Wukis Tanyabo with the details.
In Ethiopia's lowland region, a severe drought has caused everything to dry up. 3 consecutive failed rainy seasons have left families in dire need of humanitarian assistance.
It is a drought that is affecting almost 7 million people on their livelihood, on food security, and it is something which is already pretty advanced and bad, but that could worsen dramatically if the next rainy season, which is due in April, after mid-April, would not come in the way it should come.
UNICEF estimates that there are 225,000 malnourished children and over 100,000 pregnant and breastfeeding women in need of urgent nutrition support.
We have animals dying at an impressive rate, which is increasing every month, and death of animal means lack of food for children, for families, lack of money, of course, to buy food, lack of milk, and that is definitely something which is already happening.
In affected areas, the population has begun to move from the lowlands to the highlands, leaving behind young children who are unable to travel and taking older children forced to drop out of school. It is projected that in 2022, an estimated 850,000 children in the region will be severely malnourished due to multiple causes, including conflict, drought, and an economic downturn. UNICEF is now looking to raise $31 million to stage interventions in the affected areas. Bulkis Anyabo, CGTN.
Somali women and civil society organizations have amplified their calls for inclusion of more women candidates in ongoing Somalia's parliamentary elections. They're hoping to achieve a constitutional requirement for 30% of seats to be occupied by women. Mohamed Kahie has the details from Mogadishu.
Somalia has set itself a minimum benchmark of 30% women representation in parliament in order to improve the participation of women in decision-making process in the national politics. Mona Mohamed Jirshe is a candidate for lower house of parliament from Galmudug state, but her dreams to represent her constituency was cut short by a traditional tribal system that has influence in the ongoing elections across Somalia. She says that, despite her overwhelming experience, the male candidates were favored in the indirect process.
I was expecting, because of my knowledge, skills, experience and community service, to secure the parliamentary seat in my constituency, but that didn't happen. And unfortunately, I was disqualified because of being a mother and a woman with offspring from another tribe.
Mona raised her complaints to relevant agencies, but with no response.
I closely cooperated with all relevant government and non-governmental agencies on polls for complaints and sent more than 100 mails, but the answer is there is nothing we can do about it because the tribe has rejected your candidacy.
The Somali Women Organization said they will not give up on more representation in upcoming government and will knock every door.
We sat down with the 5 state leaders and the governor of Banadir administration, together with the offices of the Prime Minister and the President, in order to achieve the 30% representation for women. But tribal culture is a main challenge.
Experts believe deeply rooted Somali culture is locking many women out of the decision-making table. The Somali international partners advocate for inclusion of women in politics, while consistently urging Somali leaders to safeguard the 30% women quota in the ongoing parliamentary elections. Mohamed Kahie, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
The man accused of setting South Africa's parliament on fire on the 2nd of January will hear on Friday if he will be released on bail. The 49-year-old unemployed man was arrested on the same day the fire erupted, destroying both the National Assembly and Old Assembly houses of Parliament. His legal team says he plans to sue the state for his wrongful arrest. Renee Delcom has more.
As supporters gathered outside, calling for the accused to be released, his bail application inside the courtroom went on for around 9 hours. The defense team was adamant that their client, who had contracted COVID-19 during his incarceration, be granted his constitutional right to bail. They said just because he was poor didn't mean he should remain in custody until the case eventually went to trial.
Remember, what we were fighting for initially was that he must be heard. That was his main complaint. He must be heard. He must be given an opportunity instead of crowded out of the system. So at least today we are happy. It's one positive thing.
The state opposed the accused's bail application, saying that he faced very serious charges, including housebreaking, arson, and terrorism.
We do have a very strong case against the accused. On the day the accused did this incident, where he bought petrol at a garage in Belleville, and then he traveled to town. It was there in the affidavit where he also pointed out how he entered the Parliament building and what also he did inside Parliament.
They argued that it would not be in the interest of justice for him to be released.
He's a danger to society. He's a danger to himself. I mean, how do you ban Parliament while you are still inside yourself? That if he's released on bail, it would cause an uproar within society because there was a shock when Parliament was burnt down.
The accused told the court that he was not a flight risk. He claimed that since everyone in South Africa now knew his identity, he had nowhere to hide. He refused to comment on most of the state prosecutor's questions.
When told by the prosecutor that he could face life in prison for allegedly burning Parliament, the accused simply repeated, "I have no comment on that." Judgment in his bail hearing will be handed down on the 4th of February.
Today we are hoping that at least a judgment from now up until Friday next week, at least it's not too long. We will get a judgment, and we believe and we are hoping for the best.
The state says it's still investigating if the accused had allegedly acted alone or as part of a wider network. Renee Dalcom, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
The president of the Nigerian Journalists Association, Chris Isiguzo, has wished the Chinese people a happy new year and best wishes during the Beijing Winter Olympics. Isiguzo, talking to CGTN, expressed his hope to enhance exchanges and cooperation with Chinese media.
On behalf of the over 50,000 journalists in Nigeria, congratulate the People's Republic of China as you celebrate the Spring Festival, as we all celebrate with you this Year of Tiger. We wish you the very best. It's good that you are also hosting the Winter Olympics. I believe that the country is ready, and that's why it is opening its doors for this very big global gathering to tell the rest of the world that China is not what it used to be in the past, that China is at a different level now. We expect that it will be a good competition, it will be a good outing, and at the end, all of us will be happy for it.
Coming up in business news, Ethiopian Airlines resumes flying the Boeing 737 MAX plane. And the U.S. is considering sanctions against Sudan's military rulers if violence against protesters continues.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Mogadishu, Tunis, Cairo, Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia,
Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's bring you some news just in. At least 60 people have been killed at a displaced persons camp in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The head of a non-governmental organizations and an eyewitness say militants conducted the attacks. Has now crossed to Chris Chamringa in Kinshasa. He joins us via the line. Chris, what more can you tell us about this breaking news coming out of the DRC?
Yes, this attack happened on Wednesday in Ituri province, and an area called the Sabo People Camp. Local officials in that area have confirmed that there were 60 people who were killed in an attack by a militia group that's suspected to be the CODECO, which is the Cooperative for the Development of Congo. It's a militia group that has been operating in that area and has been accused of killing very many civilians in that place, in Ituri. The officials in the area are saying that the army has already started pursuing fighters who carried out the attack early in the morning. So they're hoping that they will get them and bring them to justice. Very many people in the Ituri province are very disappointed because these attacks against civilians have been ongoing since last year, and the government, that's despite a martial law, what they call a state of siege that the government imposed in May last year. People have been dying in that area, and they are urging the government to help protect their lives. So it's been a bit.
All right, Chris, we apologize. We had a bit of difficulty with the line, but thank you very much for that update. Chris Chamringa on the line from Kinshasa. Now, Ethiopian Airlines is due to resume flying the Boeing 737 MAX plane after a successful demonstration flight. The carrier took journalists, diplomats and officials from Addis Ababa around Mount Kilimanjaro, which is Africa's highest mountain, and then back to the Ethiopian capital on Tuesday. The airline, in a statement, said last month that the decision followed intense recertification by multiple regulatory bodies. Other countries already flying the 737 MAX include the United States, Europe, China, Australia, Japan and Indonesia. The decision, however, remains painful to some relatives of those killed in the Ethiopian Airlines crash of March 2019.
In the past few days, it has been running a lot of test flights by our flight crew and flight engineers and flight mechanics. After we made sure everything is in order, now we are doing this demonstration public relation flight, a demo flight, so to speak. It is after this that we are availing it to commercial aviation.
Personally, it's a decision that I'll never fly in a MAX. And certainly, if I find myself booked into a MAX, I'll have to cancel that flight. That is a decision I made, and I know other family members who have made similar decisions across the victims. Yes, because, and I have explained that, it is already an unstable plane. We should not be part of sanctification of something we know is wrong.
The Boeing 737 MAX plane attracted global attention following a March 2019 flight that crashed 6 minutes after takeoff in Addis Ababa, killing all 157 passengers and crew. The accident followed another one 5 months earlier when the same model crashed in Indonesia, killing 189 people. CGTN's Gurum Chala looks back at the fateful model and why it could take some people some time to fully embrace it.
In 2019, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, a Boeing 737 MAX bound for Kenya, crashed 6 minutes after takeoff from Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa, killing all 157 passengers and crew. The best-selling single-aisle airplane, which was grounded worldwide after 2 crashes, killed 346 people in the space of 5 months. In a press conference right after the crash, Ethiopian Airlines CEO Tewolde ገብረማርያም said the plane was safe to fly with no technical issues.
It is a brand new airplane with no technical remarks. flown by senior pilots, and there is no cause that we can attribute at this time. But as you know, it is international practice that international investigators, Ethiopian civil aviation investigators, and also from the aircraft manufacturer from the US, the NTCB will be participating in the investigation.
After the deadly incident, a lot has been said and done, including months-long investigative works, many court cases against Boeing by families of the deceased, and repetitive works to improve the flawed software behind the fatal crash. The plane maker has also admitted full responsibility for the crash. The MAX planes returned to service in late 2020, and one of the last carriers to resume using these planes has become Ethiopian Airlines. Still, some oppose the move and say it is too soon to make a sound decision.
The reason I don't agree with that decision is we have not seen any major changes or Boeing taking responsibility for the crashes that took hundreds of lives, Ethiopians and Indonesians, and a lot of travelers and passengers from around the world. Boeing did not even want to change the name Boeing 737 MAX 8 for whatever reason, and keeping this name, speaking for my clients and many of the passengers and the families that I am fortunate to meet and some I represent, always told me that hearing this name, just the fact that the name 737 MAX 8 being mentioned brings back a lot of trauma.
Ethiopian Airlines has more than 4 of Boeing's MAX planes in its fleet at the moment, and a few others have also been ordered with undisclosed delivery dates. Ethiopian Airlines is one of the most successful and most profitable airliners in Africa. It's also one of the few aviation industry operators which maintained a growth trajectory in these difficult COVID-19 pandemic times. Analysts say the return of the 737 MAX planes will maximize its performances. Group Jala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Senegal is set to face Burkina Faso in the semi-finals of the Africa Cup of Nations on Wednesday. Both teams held training sessions in Yaoundé on Tuesday as they prepare for a battle to reach the final. Senegal coach Aliou Cissé said it was high